I believe, and have personal experience with the clients I've worked with and people I've been facilitating for years, why affirmations doesn't really work at all. So let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about reality. I'm gonna share a little bit about how I see reality. Yes, absolutely. I fully agree with you because an affirmation goes directly against our inner belief systems. And when we create an affirmation saying, I am healthy, I am wealthy, I am successful, I am whatever we choose, whatever we say, then it contradicts that inner belief system that says, but I am created to create a reality where you are unsuccessful, and now you're trying to say the exact opposite. So now there's this inner conflict, and this is fundamentally why things such as affirmations always backfires. We absolutely choose, and by these choices our inner system starts to typos happen all the time. I see that a lot, so that doesn't matter. I still understood what you're trying to say. So yes, when we start making choices, our inner belief systems or systems of consciousness have that ability to start looking at us and say and see, but you're making a different choice here or doing something different, so let me become more curious, let me maybe step closer and see why you are creating a choice, because now it doesn't conflict my whole design. Now it's not conflicting of my purpose, but you're actually choosing to create a different reality that creates harmony again, that creates balance again. How does this tie into how we create our reality and our perceptions on reality? When we start making these choices, our inner systems are our background creators of our reality. Most of the time we are programmed to think that the way we create our reality is just by thinking about it, is just by sitting in meditation and seeing being successful or seeing how we are healthy. I know Dr. Joe Dispenza has this whole thing about seeing that life that you would like to step into, feeling that end result, and in a way, yes, that absolutely works. Don't get me wrong. I also do the way that I call it the happy meditations that Dr. Joe Dispenza describes, of how you sit and visualize that end result. But why a lot of people don't have any success when they do these things is because our inner systems of consciousness is contradictory towards that vision that we hold, towards that life that we are trying to create. They are created fundamentally to create something completely different. So when we use the affirmations, or when we just sit in these meditations or positive thinking, then we go against our own parts of who we truly are, because our inner systems are just as much a part of us as a finger or a toe. What do you think about it in the comments? Let me see if you guys agree or disagree with me. Have everybody be nice and interactive tonight. I don't want to be just talking and have nobody asking me questions or challenging me or saying yay or nay. We'll be talking a bit more. Great to see you again. It was nice to see you on Sunday, and it's great to see that you made it tonight as well. When we start with this whole process of our reality and how we create it, there's so many things that ties into this whole thing about how our reality is created, because being a collective consciousness, we're not only creating our own reality, but we're co-creating in this process. And this interesting thing about co-creating our reality, there are those who are way more fluent in being masters of their reality, and that creators, that conscious creators. You've got some people that are more conscious of the creation, and some people that is more of reactive towards reality in this amazing, interesting, crazy process of reality and creation and how we all co-create. There are mostly people that just reacts towards a reality, not truly creating consciously. Just imagine for yourself how it would look like if everybody that isn't necessarily expanded consciousness, just an average Joe, if they all consciously shaped our reality, how it would look like. And in a sense, that's exactly what's happening as a collective. Like the way I see it is, we've got this sphere. When I had a very unique journey a couple of years ago, and I saw how source and consciousness looks like, I saw it as this sphere that contains all the information, and we all tap into it and we all impart. It's like we send and receive data from this sphere that contains all the data of the collective consciousness. And the more people that agrees upon a specific concept, then you have, let's say, 1 million people agreeing on a specific way reality is. So that's the majority belief that's been put into the consciousness. So then that becomes the main stream of how consciousness functions as a collective. And if you have just one person that tries to create a different kind of reality, they can have a lot of intention and good vibes, but you've got maybe 1 million or 1 billion people that actively creates a different scenario of how reality should be. And then you've got this tug of war going on between what you want as reality and what's being co-created as reality. And then there's this whole theory about the elites that runs our reality, who are, let's call them the superhumans that lives longer and that can build that can work with the elements. They can shape reality with mere thought, and they are in control of how our reality is being shaped, and they create the illusions or the constructs of how we perceive reality down to the last little thing. Yeah, that's exactly the thing about the systems of people that actively creates reality, and most people just being reactive towards reality, is then you end up with these smaller systems of control where a smaller group of people are co-creating a specific set of rules, and then everybody else is just reacting towards this creation being put out into the consciousness. So this creates then this agreement to the creation, even if it's not something that you want. Now we are in this conflict where a lot of people, we've got thousands or millions of people that only reacts towards the few that is actively creating reality in this construct. And by just being reactive towards how those people create, you actually agree that what they are creating is right or real. Then you get stuck in this negative paradigm of having so many people constantly complaining about their reality, but by that fundamental thing of complaining, you are putting more energy into that way of reality. Does that make sense? So this is why a lot of religions and a lot of groups or systems will talk about focusing on the positive, and that brings in this misconception of spiritual bypassing that a lot of spiritual people falls in, where they become overly positive. Trying to get out of the system is impossible because for one simple reason is this entire planet or this entire reality that we live in is a system. So when I just started on my journey of expansion, that was the first thing I also thought I needed to do. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get out of this system. I have to quit my job. I have to start a community. I have to become a shaman and be this super spiritual being completely removed from the system, find like-minded people that's heading in the same direction, and we create our whole new reality, which is in essence an amazing thing to think about and dream about. It's a concept that a lot of us in my tribe will actually talk about, but the practicality of that is coming back to what I just said about this pool of conscious creators, being in a collective, being a part of a set collective, and then trying to do something that is almost alien without anything in place to sustain it. You almost have to recreate this entire human experience to be separate from it. So what happens then is spirituality, when, let's backtrack a little bit to what happened on our planet around 2019, 2020, just before COVID happened. We had this explosion of awakening where people suddenly started to remember who they are. I was one of them. Before that, I was still a very religious person. I knew there was more. I was just starting to expand a bit and realize there is more to than what was taught to me. And to have your own space is amazing. But in any case, what happens then is we get into the space where so many people is waking up to a new truth, a new way of being, embodying the Christ consciousness, realizing we don't need a savior because we're our own saviors. We see that the current money system and exchange of how it's being used, because money is neutral, the way we see it and decide to work with it is maybe a little bit wonky at the moment, because we have this whole crash of people consciously creating things, people complaining and then co-creating unknowingly. So now we get this whole new group of people that is super spiritual people, super positive people, and they complain the most about the system and how the system works. By doing that, as I said, they put in so much energy into that system, reaffirming that system, making that system even stronger, because where attention goes, energy flows, and that's ultimately what grows. It's like a mantra we have that we live by, because just think about it. If everything is energy, if you put your attention into something, even if you complain about it, that's how our mind as well works. It's something that I learned when I was studying to become a youth pastor. They taught us a couple of amazing things actually about the mind and how we work, and one of the things was that our conscious mind is obviously our five senses that it works with, and then our subconscious mind takes all that information and sees it as true, and our creative subconscious mind then takes whatever the subconscious mind receives and says, let's make this reality. For instance, if you take a small sentence saying, I feel happy, or you say, I don't feel happy, fundamentally what your subconscious mind hears is, I happy. It doesn't hear the filler words, the am not and all those things. You just hear I and happy. So then your creative subconscious mind sees that your subconscious mind have these two concepts, I and happy. Then it's like, okay, you're happy, so let me make you happy. And that's how we create our reality from a perspective when it comes to our mind alone. That's regardless of the spiritual and energetic and ethereal and all those other aspects. Now when you're in this spiritual bypassing where you're like, I have to escape the system, I have to create my own community, but I hate the system is so bad. What are you doing? You're creating systems. So you're putting in so much energy and creation into that system. So if we as expanded souls, awakened beings, people that remembers the truth of what life is, want to create a different world, what should we do? throw me your answer in the comments. Let me hear what your thoughts are. Okay, so what do we want to do to create that world that we dream about, that system that we want? How do we get there? How do we get from knowing that we are a creative consciousness is a collective consciousness, by being in the moment as well. When we live in that moment, when we truly understand that I am everything, I'm all that was, I'm all that is, I'm all the seemingly good, I'm all the seemingly bad, but also not going to the space of spiritual bypass by just focusing on the positive, but by actively working on being the change we want to see. This is a fundamental truth for so many things. It was actually something I learned when I was still in religion, which was such a beautiful concept of saying, I have to be the change that I want to be. By doing this, we already start to reprogram the mind by not focusing on the negative or what we don't want, but by focusing on what we truly desire or where we want to be. And then it starts to tie into what Dr. Joe Dispenza is talking about, being in that energy of the end result. And then we can start to feel into the resistance that we have as well. Because as soon as we start saying the actual thing that we want, we can usually very quickly find out and figure out what kind of resistance we have towards that. And a lot of times, even though we say we want to have a new system, we want a new kind of life, we want to be free, as soon as we start using those words instead of using the word saying, I don't want to be in the 3D system, then we start to realize that, oh my gosh, I actually have resistance towards creating or living in a world that is free, living in a world that is abundant, living in a world that is overflowing with love and peace and harmony. And with each of these words or concepts, when we start voicing that, we can feel that internal resistance, whether you feel it in your body, twitching, or a pain, or just this emotion of, oh my gosh, I feel a little strange when I say this. Then we know we do have somewhere in our being an internal system, a belief system that was created to interface with a different reality. Then we want to go and sit with that internal system and walk them back home again and see how we can use the skills that I have, because we don't want to get rid of anything, right? Knowing that I am all of it, trying to get rid of something is trying to get rid of a part of me. And this is another reason why people, these super spiritual people with spiritual bypassing, become so toxic, is they try to get rid of a part of self, they try to get rid of a part of consciousness. Because think about it, if we are truly source, if we are truly all of it, then why are we living in this exact reality? And why is everything exactly the way it is currently? Why is it not different? Why isn't there dragons flying around that everybody can see? And why isn't there peace on earth? And all these interesting questions. Then you start to realize, but okay, so if I am truly all of it, if I am the creator of my reality, if I am truly in control, and if I am a collective consciousness, and if I am source, then why have I chosen this specific fractalization that we call reality? Why have we specifically designed this experience for each of us to incarnate and to experience this exactly the way it is? Then you start to realize, but obviously I had to choose this. This had to be my choice. Otherwise, it goes against this whole concept of agreeing that I created this reality, or I am source, because then you cannot be source, right? Then you've got these contradictions again. So by denying yourself, by saying things like, I want to escape the system, is in effect literally telling yourself you want to run away from yourself, but because you are everything, you cannot by default run away from yourself. Does that make sense? So let's talk a bit more about consciousness and reality. If there's anybody that has any questions thus far for me, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. I'm just rambling on about the way I see reality and us as co-creators of this reality. You know, one of the big reasons why I see reality a little different than maybe a lot of other people is due to me having had some super deep experiences with mind-altering substances. The reason why I'm calling it mind-altering substances or mind-manifesting substances is I figured out that TikTok has some interesting community guidelines about what you can and cannot say, but I figured out that if I say mind manifesting or mind altering substances, that the algorithm lets it slide. One of my friends, completely off topic, the other day she was also live and showing people how to skin a chicken, and she couldn't say, she had to say, I am unaliving my chicken, because if you use the actual word of I was the chicken, then it flags it and throws you out. So that was quite funny. Our technology has some very peculiar ways to do things. So yeah, that was just funny when I heard that, and I've been also trying to figure out what phrases and things I can use. So in any case, what happened was I went on this magical exploration of consciousness and expansion to try and figure out what's it all about, you know? Yeah. So what I can tell you about the specific substances is to be super careful. You know, I had my very first experiences with these substances 6 years ago, and I did a hero's journey. The person that guided me convinced me that that's the way you should do it. So I believed him. I was brave enough or dumb enough, it's debatable which one it was, but I had an amazing experience. I won't lie, it was tough. I died around 5 times that I can remember. I became the source of all things. I became planets and all crazy things, but that was the start of a very, very, very intense journey that followed, because it opened me up to things that I couldn't even dream about. So I see you say somebody advised you to wait until you're 25. Yeah, it's very debatable when it comes to specific plants. Personally, I don't have an issue with being younger. I'm not sure what your age is at the moment, but there are tribes where trying to remember where those tribes are, but they actually give their children, they start with obviously the right amount, very, very small amounts, and a very specific strain, and they've been doing it for generations. Okay, now that's a perfect age, still a lot of life to live. So they start them at around 6 years, giving them their first experience. So they grow up literally exploring the higher states of being. And it's a freaking interesting tribe. So my big thing surrounding these specific things is, you'll hear when you go Google how to do it safe and what is expected and this and that, a lot of people will only talk about the 3 main S's. Now, I even did a course back then when I was still hell-bent on becoming a shaman, and all of the people focuses on setting substance. But unfortunately, for some reason, all of these people and institutions, they leave out the biggest thing. The only places that actually does it right to me is the indigenous people, specifically like those in South America that does Mother Aya, where you have shaman that grew up with the medicine. And that is the most important part of it. Yes, there's very, very contradictory teachings surrounding this and how to do it and why and etc. But everybody reacts completely differently with these plants. Now, in the beginning when I used it, I could use quite a lot without being out of it, and now I can almost hold it in my hands and I can be off to another dimension. So having somebody that has the correct understanding around these things is absolutely crucial, because you don't know how your being is going to react towards these substances until you used it. I had a client whom I served a plant. I served a extremely large dose and it did absolutely nothing to this person. Then another person would take a micro dose and it would hit them down to the ground, So it's not a set science, because there's so many things that determines what you're going to experience. There's obvious things that you can always look at. For instance, is it a full moon? Is it close to a equinox, summer solstice, winter solstice? Is there a specific planetary alignment? Is it close to something like we just had with the Lionsgate portal, which is a very, very big energetic thing that happens? Where are you physically on the planet? Are you close to a ley line? What convergence point of ley lines? Are you at a sacred site, which is a portal for energy? Where's your physical, spiritual, emotional energy at? What kind of diet are you using? And then also the plant itself, where did it come from? Who grew it? With what intention? With what energy? How many people were in the link before it came to you? How is your perception about yourself? That has a very, very big effect on what you're going to experience. Then the person serving you, what is their relationship with themselves? How do they perceive reality and medicine and these plants? What is their intention for you? Do they have an intention? Do they know how to handle every single situation that you might go through? Have they gone through it themselves? Have they traveled to all the dimensions and to the shadow plane? Did they go through all of it? Do they remember it? Have they experienced the edges and came back to neutrality? Are they in a position where they can handle whatever is thrown to them? Or are they just somebody that used it once or twice and had a great experience at a festival, and now they're this spiritual shaman that wants to serve people medicine and take them on a quest, but actually they still do not have their own shit together? So being somebody that did it most of my journey completely alone, not having had a proper shaman to guide me, I have seen more or less the worst of what can happen. I have experienced myself a couple of hectic things where I would still think back on it and think to myself, how am I possibly still alive? Proving how reality really doesn't follow a set of rules. Reality is absolutely moldable, and the things I've experienced showed me that our concept of what really is real can significantly be changed and altered. And then there's that whole concept about how far have you gone into your own mind? How far have you gone into your consciousness before you want to use a substance or a plant that is medicine? What can your consciousness hold and experience? Where are you in your soul's journey? I've seen going to quite a number of festivals in the last couple of years where people obviously take it for the party scene, and then you get everything of everything and everything in between. But just witnessing what people experience, excuse me, I have seen how that a lot of people, when they go into the vibration and the frequency that this permission slip brings them, it's a wave they ride, and when they come back they have complete amnesia again. They will a lot of times tell you a story that is different to what actually happened, because in their consciousness they are not ready to experience what they see. I had that myself. I actually had this very unique experience where I took a family member on a journey, not giving a big dose of what I was serving. I took the same amount. It's what I was channeling in that moment before we went out to this beautiful sacred spot that we had back then. While we were in the ceremony, one of my higher selves my source self came through. I was still very in the early stages of my journey of expansion as well. I was just getting to know how to work with energy and channeling and light codes and the flow codes and all of it. So it was still very new, and a lot of these things were still a bit scary, but I was brave and a little stupid. Still, the things we do sometimes out of wanting to help and not really making sure that we have the right tools and equipment. So I was one of the lucky ones. But in any case, during the ceremony, I went into a space where I disconnected from my 3D self, the being I am right now, right here today. Well, I am now the person I became that day, but I stepped into such a high source self of version of myself in that ceremony that I completely disconnected from my physical body. That's how it felt like. I remember telling my partner that I cannot connect it back into Jake's. I couldn't talk about myself as me, it was separate. And the 20 minutes or half an hour that played out there, what I remember now is a different story. So what happened was, when I was in that space, something specific happened where my source self told me that what happens here, you're going to forget completely, you're going to have full amnesia. Then when you sober up, you're going to start remembering what happened, but a watered down version of what actually happened, because you're not ready to fully see or understand what actually happened. And that was so weird, because when we both sobered up, there was this huge activations that happened, and it was absolute magic and freaking crazy. I had exactly that experience. I've had complete amnesia. I was like, okay, it's happening. I forgot everything that happened, and on our way back home, I slowly started to remember what happened, but I knew that what I'm remembering is not the actual story. And up to today, I don't remember the original story. I remember that little watered down version of the story, which was still super magical and amazing. And I know now I am in my power and in my ability to be able to do that same kind of work without using that amount of medicine or permission slips, because at the end of the day, you'll learn that all these substances, all these plants, whatever you use, it's just a permission slip. It's just you giving yourself permission to go into a specific state of being. So we can attain that exact same level of consciousness, that same level of vibration and frequency through breath work or through meditation. It is definitely easier using these medicines or plants because it's a very, very fast track to get there, but not everybody is ready to experience that. And yes, I see you mentioned about feeling that you're starting from scratch. Yes, that definitely happens. I absolutely know what you're talking about. I felt that so many times. It felt to me when I started on this journey of expansion like the dam was ripped out underneath the dock, but not just the dam, the whole planet with the dam and the dock was ripped out underneath me. It's like everything you thought was true and everything you thought was real completely changes. That was also one of the first things that I was shown when I started working with the mind-altering substances, was that reality is upside down, inside out, and in reverse, and everything we know that is wrong is most probably right, and everything that we think is false is most probably true, and etc., etc. So that completely challenged everything. Because now you start looking at life and you're like, oh my gosh, if everybody agrees that the planet is round, isn't it maybe flat? And you're like, no, it's definitely round, it has to be round. But then you think, but I just learned that everything I know is wrong and upside down. So is it this or is it that? And then you start seeing all these things about 3 or 4 different archetypes of what our reality is, and like, okay, now which one is true? And then you use some of these substances and you experience those different realities. I've literally experienced a reality where the planet was a dome. That was the strangest thing. You could literally, when you look into the sky, you could see the grid, this hexagonal, tangible, visible grid in the sky. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a small planet, like crazy. And then you would come back and it would be gone. So yeah, you say you feel disconnected to who you used to be, and your spiritualness is not the same. And no, absolutely, it everything changes, because you reinvent yourself completely. Now, if I look at who I was before I started on this journey of expansion, being actively participating in church, playing in the band, being the youth pastor for the teenagers, talking about good and evil, heaven and hell, angels and demons, and then getting to this point where I realized, but I am actually God, and I am actually Satan, I am actually the angels, I am the demons, I am everything in between. I am everything that I thought was good and everything that I thought was bad and everything in between. Like, oh my gosh, then your brain starts spinning and you feel completely overwhelmed and you run away, but then you realize, I can't run away because I'm everything, so where can I go that I'm not? Because everywhere I go, I just find myself. I'm everywhere I go. So what do? You can't kill yourself, because every experience, regardless of what frequency or vibration you're in, that's life, that's real. So why don't I just stay here and make sense of it? It's this weird thing about expansion that can be absolutely mind-boggling, because there's so much that starts to become contradictory. There's so many things that answers your questions, but also a lot that raises fundamental questions about our very existence, what we were brought up and raised up on, what we need to believe is true. So when we just keep on keeping on in this journey, eventually it gets easier. Eventually you start to decide and make peace with what you believe is your truth for your reality. I love to talk about the stages of grief, and this applies to every single part of life. It applies to when you lose your religion, when you start losing your reality, because essentially when you start waking up from the illusion that you grew up in, is now you lost most of your beingness, your livelihood, your identity. You transcended into a space where 80-90% of what you fundamentally believe is not applicable to the new set of rules that you're going into. And we experience that grief. We experience it the same way we will grieve the loss of a finger or a toe or a loved one, because it's a big part of you that now changes. The rules changes and you start grieving. You go through the anger, you go through the sadness, the resentment, and eventually when you have worked through all these powerful emotions, grieving that loss of your old reality, trying to find your new reality, eventually you get to that acceptance, and that's when things start to settle down. And for everybody, this takes a different amount of time. I was lucky in a sense, it went very fast. Everything was like in fast forward mode. I asked the universe to give me a crash course in this expansion to get me to where I wanted to be, and it happily obliged. It didn't take the long road with me. It said, okay, you want to do it fast, let's do it, let me show you how it's done when it's done fast. And I didn't survive it a couple of times, but still came back. So when you start going into that acceptance, reality starts to make a little bit more sense, or your reality. One thing that I have learned is we all occupy the same space, but we live in different realities. That also ties into that concept of, let's say, when you take DMT, you don't go to that realm. You stay exactly where you are. You just vibrationally vibrate into a frequency where that is real, where that is reality. So you don't go anywhere. You just perceive a different state of being. So if you do the opposite, if you could lower your vibration significantly, you might be able to perceive how, let's say, a rock or whatever perceives reality, and that might be very interesting. So when we use things to elevate our vibration, then we start seeing the beings and the energies that experiences reality on that bandwidth, on that frequency with. So we didn't really go anywhere. Now, that is what happens in our reality as well. When you go through this expansion, I can imagine that on that they will also experience it. I also know that the very few people I spoke to personally that has used it said that that specific plant is one of the most extreme you can ever go, and it's highly recommended to stay clear from it if you're not one of those super crazy or strong, brave people with the right body and everything to handle those things. The one interesting thing is, even in my experiences, I had this one experience of literally being a planet. Now you can imagine for yourself how long it must take when you are birthed as a planet. I don't have super clear memory on the whole process that I went through. I just remember I was something like a ball of energy, magma, lava or whatever, and then went through this process of solidifying into a planet. Then life started to grow from the very beginning of how we experience life evolved. And if I remember correctly, in that experience, me as the planet ended with animals and plants like we've got on our planet. Was a bit different because where I was situated in whatever solar system I was much darker, so there wasn't a nearby star to shine a lot of light, so everything evolved to be to survive in way more darkness. So how I also saw it was when I was this planet, everything that lived on the planet, they are the eyes and the ears and the movement of the planet. The same way we are here on Mother Gaia. We are not from somewhere else coming to planet Earth and now we inherited the planet. We are literally Mother Earth. We are her eyes, we are her ears, we are her feet. We are the conscious part of the planet experiencing itself to know what it is like to be more conscious. And with every single life that's been lived on this planet, and obviously we as conscious beings, we come into this vessel and experience it with her. And that is why things like the mushrooms connects us so deeply into Mother Gaia, takes us into the mycelium network, because we are actually literally physically a part of Gaia, and her consciousness is our consciousness and our consciousness is her consciousness. And every single life that gets lived is a way of her learning more about herself. No, I have not played Final Fantasy VII, neither 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. I'm not really big on gaming, why do you ask? So, being in this, knowing that we are literally a part of Mother Earth, she evolves and expands through our integration and interaction as beings with Mother Gaia. And with every life, when you go back to Earth, she absorbs that memory back and learns more about herself. This is how planets evolve. It was how I saw it, which was for me one of the most beautiful things and concepts that I went through. So what was very crazy, weird and interesting when I had that experience of being this planet far away from where I actually was when I started coming back out of that journey. The first thing that happened is I had a head. Then I felt like I'm the planet, but I have a head, and I was so confused, like, how can I be a planet with a human head? And then the next thing, I was a planet, but I had a half of my, my upper body. I'm like, how can I be a planet but have half of a human body? And then next moment I had a full body, and I was like, this feels so weird. I'm so small. I just had the ability to experience every single insect, every single plant, every single rock, the wind, the water, everything that was on the planet. I was all of it. I could experience all of that simultaneously. It was a way of expansion that was absolutely crazy. I have seen some of it, but for me, Sassy the Sasquatch is a little, I don't know, it's not up my alley. I just don't resonate much with it. I have watched, what's that series? Now it slipped my mind. It's a lot like that, but it's also about this guy that he sticks his head in this plant thingy, and then he travels to all kinds of dimensions and have these interviews with all kinds of beings and experience all these weird things. That was quite interesting when I watched it, but I think in a sense more so because I was always stoned when I watched those things. Back then I watched Rick and Morty and all these stories. Midnight something, that's right. So most of these stories are way better when you're super stoned, but yeah, that's not how I do things anymore. I'm now way too sensitive. I used to smoke like all day. Yes, midnight gospel, that's the thing. Yeah, this guy that they had quite interesting in conversations, right? When you're able to follow some of the concepts they come forth with, with. It was quite mind challenging to listen to a lot of the things that they said, but I think one of the things that was difficult to follow was they were talking so fast, or I was just too stoned to follow. I wouldn't know. I haven't watched it sober yet, so maybe they weren't talking too fast. Maybe I was just too slow from my side to actually follow. But yeah, there are some stories out there that is definitely very interesting. Even a silly story like Rick and Morty, they come up with very interesting concepts. The people that create these series, they definitely travel and lucid dream or astral travel and do all these kind of things. I don't know if any one of you ever experienced lucid dreaming or astral traveling or remote viewing. That's also quite interesting concepts to talk about and experience. Yeah, likewise, I started experimenting with astral traveling around 12 years ago for the first time, but for some reason I maybe still have some inner belief systems that was instilled in me from a very young age or something, but I had very, very little success to get into the astral. I did when I was 11 years old, before Christianity screwed that up for me. Somebody told me about lucid dreaming, and that night I had this amazing lucid dream. Then the following day or a couple of days later, somebody told me it's evil, you shouldn't do it, and since then I never had a proper lucid dream again. By the time I learned that it's actually freaking amazing and normal and we all should be able to do it, I think that patterns in my brain was so deeply rooted that, yeah. But I had a couple of astral traveling experiences. I followed this one book that is called The 90-Day Journey to Mastering Astral Projection, where you can find it on Google Books. I think in the first chapter, the first week's exercises or something like that is missing, and then the rest, when you download the book, the PDF, the free book, week one's exercises are missing, but you can find it on Google Books, where they actually go very deep into the whole concept of what astral traveling is, the inner workings of it. It's very thorough, but when I was really putting all my energy into it, I had some spontaneous moments when I'll go to bed and then just realizing I am astral traveling, and then that pure excitement of knowing I'm astral traveling then jolts you back in your body, like, crap, why do I get so overexcited? I remember one of the experiences that I had was one of the things I tell you is when you look at your hands when you're in the astral, usually you would not have 10 fingers. They would be like 11 or 9, or it's almost like being on acid. It's always changing and very bright. The colors was there. It was like when you turn on the hue on your reality, it's super bright. And that night also I had this spontaneous experience of looking at my hands and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm traveling. I'm like, no, don't get too excited. If you get too excited, you jolt back to your body. So let me just keep it low-key. Let me focus on my hands. As long as I can see my hands, I know I'll be in the astral. And I was just freaking running around. Reality was all kinds of weird, but I stayed. That was, I think, the longest I ever stayed in the astral that I can remember. In any case, just looking at my hands, completely missing everything else. But yeah, that was fun. And sorry, then I also had a couple of other experiences where I would be out of my body for a very short time and realizing, oh, I'm out, and then bloop, getting back in, and things like that. So yeah, being able to do that is definitely a skill I would love to master one day. Then there's the hemisync from the Monroe Institution, where it's the declassification of the CIA program that they use to train soldiers to remote view and astral travel. It's a very proper course as well, that they use the techniques from hemi-syncing your brain to be in that coherence with yourself, to project yourself out of your body, or to expand your consciousness in such a way that you can do all these things. Well, there's a lot of rumors about that specific boat. You know, the problem with religion and all the stories in religion is it's very fuzzy, and most of the times very what's the right word? It's built around parables and things that's not exactly true. So when you look from a more expanded point of view, the whole concept of the flood and the ark could have been referring to a spaceship, not necessarily a wooden boat that was floating on the water. If you look at the whole mechanics surrounding the whole big flood with Noah and the ark and all the animals, when you really start to think about it, I had this conversation with ChatGPT, the other day as well. Out of curiosity, I was trying to figure out if that was true, what the mechanics surrounding it is. Then you start to realize that it's like a bedtime story. The way they changed it to make sense and to fit within the paradigms of Christianity. So yeah, I can imagine how reading the Bible will take you away from Christianity, because the sheer ridiculousness of the stories in there completely messes everything up. Honestly, I feel if you wanted to create a religion and you want things to actually make sense, they could have done a better job. They could have made it at least make mathematically sense. So all around the planet, you will have tribes that have a very similar story about a great flood. Yes, absolutely, I fully agree. When I look at the planet myself, if I look at how our mountains and valleys are shaped, I can absolutely see that something huge did happen. I can absolutely understand that we did have a meteor strike that hit the northern hemisphere, something huge, something cataclysmic that definitely happened. I know that Billy Karsten, he goes very deep into all of this. He's been studying these things for, I think, over 20 years, so he's very knowledgeable about the Emerald Tablets and all the stories surrounding what the history of our planet might be. And then it becomes very clear how there was a big flood, but if you think about the speed of what water travels, even if all the ice in the northern hemisphere, regardless of how much it was back in the day, it could have taken anything from days to even like a month to reach the southern parts of the planet, because water can only travel that fast. Then you also realize that there were a lot of extraterrestrial influence since the very beginning. My dad also has a couple of very interesting books where there are fascinating stories about people that were taken into ships and shown the history and the things that they would say of how this planet was seeded, and the plants and the animals, how planet Earth is possibly a seed bank of life, and a lot of different things that had influence, and how something that I saw myself in one of my journeys that was shown to me is how the extraterrestrial races are our future, and they came back in time to help and assist us to have a different timeline to reach a very specific outcome that is in harmony and balance. Even Matthias de Stefano talks about these concepts as well, because he has memory of living, I can't remember how many different lives from how many different planets and eras, even on our planet. It's quite fascinating to hear when these kind of people start talking about their memory. I quite enjoy the things he would say. I don't know if you've ever heard about Matthias de Stefano. So he also talks a lot about our the Pleiadians, the Arcturians, the reptilians, and all these races. He has also a very big history of how he speaks about it. And there's people like Eilali that also channels these beings and can talk about the origins of where they came from, also speak in their languages, the frequencies they speak in. And yeah, so there's a very interesting world when it comes to these things. It's a funny world we live in, when before I started on my journey of expansion, my reality was definitely a lot smaller. I must say that's one thing that changes quite significantly when we start to expand. It's, that literal sense of expansion. Everything that we know expands. Our reality becomes much, much, much larger, and we start to experience things that we never experienced before. Like with this knowledge of the extraterrestrials, I always heard these things about ETs and seen them on films, the way they portrayed them. The films back in the day was also very negatively polarized, was always about itchy, always about ETs invading the planet, and then people kill all of them, and there are all this bad and evil stuff. And lately, luckily, that has started to change. But when I started to expand, I suddenly started to dream. I started to have these dreams about extraterrestrials visiting planet Earth. I started to have dreams where they would come to me and I would speak to them. They would have conversations with me about certain things, and some of the dreams were literally dystopian realities where there would be some kind of war and between most probably humans against humans, but then the ETs would come to pick some of us to take us away. I remember this one specific dream where this huge craft landed close to where I was hiding in a crater, and there was a bunch of beings from different races standing around me, and this one specific one was dressed in this beautiful gold and this robes of gold, and all the jewelry was gold. It was very, very beautiful. And it was if I remember correctly, it was a princess or a a higher ranking person from wherever they came from, and to ask me to come with them. And I was like, no, I can't go without my partner. We will come together when we're both ready. And they just politely nodded and said, okay. Obviously in telepathy they usually don't speak in our languages the way we do, and left. So that was a very interesting experience to go through. That was quite fun. But I feel at the end of the day, we start to experience these different dreams, lucid dreams, astral experiences, whether we take medicine or not, and we start experimenting with these concepts of what is real so that we can become more familiar and used to the fact that these beings truly exist, that by the time they do come to us, that we will be ready and not afraid. I know Bashar talks a lot about having first contact from around 2027, if everything goes the way it's currently going. Time is always a very something that always changes, so there's no perfect way to know. How would I advise somebody to start with their spiritual journey and befriend their higher self? Well, you just do it in whichever way resonates the most with you. When it comes to consciousness and expansion, every one of us is so unique. Every one of us has such a unique journey. The one thing I would suggest is having a space where you can truly be quiet with yourself. Doing something like mirror work is extremely powerful when you physically take a mirror and you stare into it. And if you can speak in light language, you talk in light language. If the only language you can speak is your native language, then use that. But sitting with yourself for half an hour, 3 hours, just allowing whatever comes through. Mirrors is a very fascinating thing. I've seen a couple of things that allegedly talks about people that done research and how mirrors are portals to a specific dimension. But people that actively does mirror work will say that yes, it is definitely a portal. Your mirror reflection will start to shapeshift into different beings. And if you're lucky enough and do it enough, and if your being is ready and open, you can start having a conversation with that being that reflects in the mirror. It really helps, especially in the beginning of our expansion journey, to have enough time to sit still with ourselves, because in that quiet time, in that stillness, our internal being can start to communicate with us. It's literally a thing of we became disconnected, or actually we never became disconnected. That's a wrong way of looking at it. We're always connected, we're always on. We just became sensory deprived. We forgot how to listen, and we forgot what we are hearing all the time. So when we start paying attention again to that voices in our head, and when you do spend a lot of time between a lot of people and energies, it can be tough to hear that inner voice, that source communication. That is why it helps so much when you can go through this journey of mastering your chakras and working with your systems of consciousness, because when you go into your heart space and you truly embody your heart chakra again, that is your 0 point. That is that space where you can go into that space of nothingness, but being everything. That's where everything can be tuned out. I remember a couple of years ago when I focused on mastering meditation. I sat up to an hour in per session. I did a couple of meditation practices per day. And eventually I came to a place where I could sit in smack center of a crowd and everything would go black. I would lose all senses. I would not hear a single thing, and even time would completely dissolve. I would sit for an hour and it would feel like 5 minutes. I always joke to my partner and say it, whenever I meditate it feels like 5 minutes, regardless if it is actually 5 minutes on the clock or an hour and 5 minutes. It always felt the same, because you vibrationally go into this space where you kind of, let's call it, tap out of reality. You go into the 0 point. In this space, so what actually happened a lot to me during my journey of expansion, how I experienced a lot of my aha moments and a lot of the knowledge started coming through, was actually when I was stoned. That was the best medicine I used to tap into. So I would be at home, I would smoke a little bit, then I would deliberately go and sit in meditation, and I would ask my source to communicate with me. And then being in that elevated state of being, obviously now I know I could have used breath work, but used what was available when it was available. And so then my source communicated with me, and the more you do it, the more you're able to listen and experience that inner part of you. So it's like practicing a muscle, exercising a muscle. It's like anything else in life. The more you practice, the better you get at it. It's literally with everything. Our entire being, our body, this reality is set up in this use it or lose it kind of way. When you spend a lot of time doing something, you become a master at it, and as soon as you stop, you start losing it. It's unfortunately one of those things. It would have been freaking fantastic if we could practice a specific skill until we mastered it, and then have no need to practice it again, but staying a master at it. Unfortunately, if we don't practice it, we lose it. It's I guess one of the things we programmed into this reality to keep it exciting, right? Finding a space where there's like-minded people. You become like those you hang out with.